The Centurion Project. Written by the 8th Day of Night. Chapter 52. Final Goodbyes. Part 1. Elias stood silent and stoic next to the other generals on a tall stage. Before them was a massive crowd, separated into two sections. On one side stood gleaming, perfectly straight rows of armored ponies, organized in the tightly packed columns by the color of their armor. On the other stood packed stands full of ponies, old and young alike. The early morning ceremony had been announced days prior, and as a result, as many ponies as possible were in attendance. Elias knew that he had surprised Celeste by pushing hard on the advertisement of the ceremony, but he knew the real importance of it. It wasn't just some show about the growth of Equestria's military, or the extension of the country's aid to the Saddle Arabians. No, it was the latter part of the ceremony that was so important, the farewell to the families. Elias let himself blank out as Celeste continued to drone on about the march. With his injury, as well as Cadence's new kingdom in the north, the ceremony showing off the new legion and the great expansion of the other guard forces had been pushed off into the last possible minute. Luckily, Cadence had reported that she was fully able to restore her stores of magic using the crystal heart, and as such they were able to leave on time. The Eloquent had already spent nearly an hour calibrating the canterlot side of the portal. A massive archway made of marble cut through the twisting veins of silver. The science behind the magic was again lost on Elias, but he didn't much care, just so long as the goal of the mission worked. Now, all they had to do was finish the farewell ceremony, then the journey would begin. Glancing to his left, Elias managed to catch a sorrowful glance Cadence was throwing his way. He knew why, of course. The report he had received from Night Flash had been very clear, if not slightly obscured, by furious passion. The Pegasus had tore into the Pink Princess about her stance on his near-death experience. But in truth, Elias couldn't find it within himself to care. Yes, she could have been solely responsible for his death, but that was more out of negligence than any malice. He held no more hate in his heart for her than he did for Celestia. In truth, all the new knowledge had done for him was force him to keep an eye out on yet another opponent. Her disdain and perhaps hatred had been thrust into the limelight, just where he wanted it. The more enemies he could see, the better he could combat them. Even more fortunate was the fact that Cadence seemed to have second thoughts on her actions, making her a non-player in the game of his life for the moment. Elias's eyes flicked outward, slowly sweeping over the armored ponies. They numbered just over 10,000, with 3/4 of the guard forces having spent some time under his training. After he had recovered enough to stand, Elias had thrown himself back into the swing of things, drilling his legion harder and harder. Several new areas of training had been added, further dividing the cohort into specialized sections, each with their own unique job, and each kept into the utmost secrecy. He had already had a hard time justifying why he needed 30 barrels of blasting jelly, but with Enyon handling his under-the-table crafting needs, the matter was settled, and his legionaries were already prepared to lug the heavy barrels of explosives alongside the empty water barrels. Nightshade had approached him within days of his escape from the infirmary, asking if he would be willing to include her guards on the Legion's afternoon marches. Elias wasn't one to turn down additional, more realistic practice, so with a few instructional letters, the Lunar Guards had begun marching alongside his legionaries. A few days after that, Midnight Chaser had asked for the same, and Luna had volunteered herself to sit in to stand in the carriage that the black-clad ponies were supposed to guard. Their marches suddenly garnered a great deal more attention, and although the first few marches were slow because of their new add-ons, the Lunar Guard and Royal Guards quickly adapted, adjusting to the rapid pace of the legionary set. As they stood, most of the army was prepared for the long march. With the emotional issues finally separated from the military ones, Elias, Nightshade, and Midnight Chaser had once again coordinated, making arrangements without the approval of the Solar Generals. Once their proposals had been finalized and looked over by Luna, they had put them forth at the weekly logistics meeting. It had brought a smile to Elias's face when Lionheart was once again kicked to the bottom rung. No longer did Elias find himself late at meetings, and no longer was he kept out of the loop. Instead, with the backing of 3/4 of the guard forces, he found himself in a position to do a great deal of good. Instead of taking after Lionheart's petty example, Elias had taken to his work with zeal, doing everything in his power to make sure that even the slightest details had been taken care of. Supplies were bought and paid for. New armaments were commissioned and distributed, and every minute of the march had a plan, and a backup plan. Elias felt confident that they would be able to respond to any threat, and that there was almost nothing left to do but to leave. Almost. The human glanced at Celestia as she continued her speech. The white alicorn had once again become outwardly neutral to his actions, always treating him with a minimum level of respect, but never attempting to undermine him, openly or in private. Whatever Luna had done to drag her older sister back in line, it had worked well, and Celestia once again found the value of his experienced counsel. There was only one matter that she had left undecided. Who would act as the sole diplomatic voice for the army? Technically speaking, there were two matters, but nobody, save for Lionheart, doubted that Elias would be assigned as overall battle commander for the army. It was his force that was the most militaristic, and it was he who had the greatest degree of actual battle experience. He couldn't confirm whether it was a rumor or not, but Elias had heard whispers that after the march the guard forces would return to being just that, guard forces. The Legio I Equus, however, was to be molded into Equestria's official standing military. The justification he had heard was the rising number of the world-ending threats that the standard guard hadn't been adept enough to even stall, let alone halt. With the increasing turmoil on the border of the Zebralands, ponies wanted a more visible presence of equestrian might, and his silver and red ponies more than met that want. By leading the army on the battlefield, Elias could prove once and for all that he was fit enough to manage an army on a grand scale. While the idea of managing a permanent army did rouse his age-old nerves, the idea did provide some hope in the human. He still hadn't answered the question of what his purpose would be following the march, and while he had ideas for his relationships, he lacked a greater goal for life. Maintaining peace and drilling ponies for a living wasn't so terrible a fate. Elias snapped to the president as Celestia looked back to the line of generals.
It is these fine mares and gentle colts who will lead our brave guards through this trying time, and it is they who I place my utter trust in. Generals, Equestria is forever in your debt.
The pink mane alicorn offered a slight bow to their line, and Elias noted a few chests puffing out, but he showed nothing on his face, merely kept a light frown across his lips. He didn't care at all for the alicorn's words, even if they weren't wholly empty. Instead, Elias looked at the alicorn up and down one more time, making note of all her new weaknesses. As the weeks had passed, the results of their magical storage became more and more evident. Cadence was the least impacted, only losing an inch of her height. A haggard look sat on her face, but whether or not that was purely the result of storage or of guilt, Elias didn't know. Celestia was much shorter, now the height of her pink niece, and like her niece, her mane had turned a bright pink. Her hair no longer waved, and both her mane and tail were tied into shorter buns. Even her horn had grown shorter, looking far more like the normal stub most unicorns sported. Finally was Luna. For some reason she was shorter than both Cadence and Celestia, making her look positively adorable. Standing just above the height of a normal pony, her mane had also ceased flowing, and had become a static blue, undecorated by stars. Unlike her sister, however, her mane still hung down, and on more than one occasion she had to brush it from her face. Elias glanced in her direction just in time to catch her mane falling once more into her eyes. The blue alicorn's muzzle scrunched up into a barely concealed frustration, and she wiped her hair away again, tucking it behind her ear.
On that note,
Celestia said, bringing her speech to a close,
we had best conclude this ceremony so that you may say your goodbyes. No matter what happens on this journey, we will not be home for some time, and unfortunately, there is no mail service in the Minotaur lands.
For her tone, it was clear that she meant the final statement as a joke, but few, if anyone, laughed. Elias knew, as did many ponies, that the lack of news would be one of the worst things about their march. Any of the guards could die within the first few days of the march, but the families wouldn't be informed until weeks later, when the march concluded. Since something like the March to Saddle Arabia had been attempted in equestrian history, many ponies were going to spend the entire time worrying, and Elias couldn't blame them. Celestia gave a few final words. Then she, Luna, and Cadence were escorted off the stage and into their magically enhanced carriage. Elias watched them go for a moment, noticing something that he had picked up on before but hadn't quite confirmed until the ceremony had concluded. After nearly an hour standing in the sun on stage, all three alicorns looked exhausted, particularly Celestia. She leaned heavily against a pair of royal guards, particularly being carried to the drab-brown carriage they would ride in for the duration of the trip. On the outside, the carriage looked normal, if a bit dull for the royal tastes. It was a plain brown color with pale highlights. While they were still in equestrian territory, the top of the carriage would remain off. The effort was at Celestia's insistence, something about needing to inspire ponies of their cause. Elias let her have the small concession, since his own regarding the carriage were met in full. The dull color was his choice, and allowed it to blend in amongst the trees instead of sticking out like a sore, brightly colored thumb. Once the top was put on it and sealed in place by Anyon, the carriage would be magically protected as well. Dozens of spells had been placed in the piece of wood and steel. It would take a supreme to even open the door without one of the keys, designed for such. One such key sat on the chain Elias kept around his neck. It rested comfortably next to Luna's feather, and the locket Night Flash had given him. Once the carriage door was locked, the alicorns likely wouldn't leave it, not even while in camp. With the top on, the carriage's exterior magically extended to the size of a spacious bedroom that includes beds for each alicorn, as well as a cabinet that was linked to Canterlot's kitchens, providing the trio with their every meal. Unfortunately, the magic required to power the cabinet didn't accept living beings, and didn't allow for more than a certain poundage of food to be sent through in one day. He had drifted off during Luna's lecture about the little magical reasons such magic wasn't more widespread, and the only reason that he hadn't been smacked was that she got a free chance to cuddle his comatose form. The only thing that the carriage couldn't provide was plumbing, and so the alicorns had been allowed one maid each to help handle bathroom trips. A staff Elias had been made familiar with when Luna had asked him to run them through rudimentary camp maintenance training. They had performed well enough for quick trainees, and for Celestia, Luna, and Cadence respectively, there was Open Flame, Feather Dust, and Soft Touch, who Elias recognized from her Legion application. When he had questioned her on it, she had informed him that she had actually been Cadence's secret bodyguard since childhood, and had remained on the Pink Alicorn's employ by first being a caretaker, then a maid. When he had asked why she hadn't helped the Pink Princess in the Crystal Empire, she had merely smiled and winked, saying,
"Believe me, General, if the princess was ever in real danger, I would have been the first to intercept it."
Elias did a soft touch as she gently took Cadence's wing and helped her into the carriage. The plum-colored Pegasus glanced in his direction, showing no signs of recognition other than a split-second wink. The slight motion provoked him to look away, lest the alicorns think he was staring. His eyes drifted out to the armored ponies, most of whom were already dispersing to intermingle with the tidal wave that was their families. The ponies in silver and red, however, remained still, watching him carefully as he made his way across and then off the stage. Once he was on the ground, Elias began stalking through their lines, looking for any lingering signs of slacking discipline. It was the very last chance he had to weed out the weak, to potentially save lives by removing those who were just slightly out of line, by finding those who had split-second lack of attention to detail that would get them killed on the battlefield. He found no such thing amongst his ponies, and though he felt a thrill of satisfaction in his mind, he didn't show it. No longer could he offer praise, not when battle was so close. His night terrors had once again shifted, showing him a battlefield he had never seen before. The strangest part of his dreams was the lack of evidence of battle. There was no blood, no bodies, no shattered weapons. There was simply nothing but grass and trees, and yet he knew there would be battle. No matter what his scouts said about cooling tempers of the Minotaurs, no matter how much the other generals made assurances to the princesses that he knew, he prayed to whoever he was listening that his premonitions didn't come to pass. "Listen up," Elias bellowed. "You have 20 minutes. Make sure you say your goodbyes and leave whatever keepsakes you intended to leave behind. I have read through your wills, and I know that each and every one of you signed the box stating that you know this may be a one-way trip. Don't waste this time with your families. It might be the last chance you get." Elias scanned their faces for ponies before him, remaining silent for a moment. When it passed in relative silence, he gave a short nod. "Dismissed." The silver-clad ponies broke formation and scattered, loudly calling out for their loved ones. Within a few moments, Elias was alone on the assembly field, and he clasped his hands behind his back as he watched the ponies embrace their loved ones. He was mildly surprised when 2 ponies came trotting up behind him, and he looked in question to Snowball. The Loveling grinned back. "I already said my goodbyes to my hive mates in the castle," the Loveling said, answering the unasked question. "Besides, I'm always connected to everything." He tapped his horn. "The hive mind is great like that. I really don't get how everyone else gets by without having everyone you love all cuddle up in each other's brains." Elias resisted the urge to gag at the thought of such a privacy violation, but luckily Granite did it for him. "You can't tell me that you enjoy having everyone buzzing around your head," the Earth Pony said in disbelief. "I would lose my mind if my family was anywhere near that close." Elias frowned slightly. "So you do have a family, then?" You could feel the Earth Pony wince. When he didn't reply, Elias glanced down at him. "Well?" Grey Granite refused to meet his eyes, instead opting to stare at the ground. I do. Parents, 2 brothers, 1 sister." Elias looked to the crowds of ponies, looking for anyone still searching. "Are they here?" "I don't have anything to say to them, General," Grant said. "They didn't get why I joined up then, and don't get why I'm going to harm's way." "That wasn't my question, Centurion," Elias cut in. "I asked, are they here?" The Earth Pony shrank slightly. Yes, General. My sister is." "Then go talk to her," Elias said. "Go say your goodbyes. You may be strong, Centurion, but nobody is invincible. Say your goodbyes while you're still alive, even if it makes you uncomfortable. You still love these ponies, right?" "Well, yes, but nothing. Get." Granite let out a sigh and he drooped. "Okay, General. I will." Elias grunted in surprise as a firm set of hose wrapped around his chest, managing to squeeze him despite his steel cuirass. "Goodbye, Elias," he whispered. "You've been the best friend I ever had, and no matter what happens, you always will be." Before Elias's brain could fire up enough to come up with a response, Granite was gone, trotting into the crowd without looking back. Elias stared at him blankly while Snowball chuckled. "Well, I can't say I didn't see that coming. I'm still surprised he went through with it." He shook his head. "Just shows you can't predict ponies." Elias gave him an incredulous look. "You knew he would do that? He shook his head slowly. "I thought we were just barely friends. We've barely even spoken to each other." Snowball snorted. "He's a quiet pony, Elias. He isn't Night Flash. Not every interaction is an excuse to cuddle." The Loveling gave a shrug. "Granite has always looked up to you, at least as much as I've seen. All the ponies in the Legion idolize you to some extent, but Granite puts you above everyone, and almost goes so far as to say that he believes you infallible. He's loyal to a fault." "Why?" Elias asked. "What have I done to earn that level of loyalty? Yes, I've taken measures to ensure that the Legion follows my orders above all else, but that's a command thing. It doesn't extend outside all of this." Motion around them. It certainly shouldn't extend to a personal level. Not to this extent. Snowball shrugged again.
I don't have proof that you're wrong, but if I had to guess, I would say that you were the first pony to offer him his own path. You heard what he said about his family not understanding his life, but you do. More than any pony you do. Maybe it's that. How did you two meet?
He was standing right beside me during the rat exam, Eli said. When we were going to the teleportation circle, he was tailing behind Bookbinders Scarlet, Night Flash, and I. So I called him over to tag along with us. He was the newest lunar guard at that point. That was that. He just became really, my friend after.
Snowball smiled. That is such an Elias friendship story.
When the human shot McGillard, the loveling raised a hoof.
Not criticizing or making light, merely observing.
He straightened and the smile returned.
But I think that's it. Loyalty doesn't always have to be earned by some great sweeping gestures. For some ponies, it's the little things. You've just done a lot right for granted, and he loves you for it.
Jamal smacked his lips and his eyes took a sharp glow for a moment.
And that hug wasn't for show either. He loves you as much as Night Flash and Bookbinder do.
His muzzle curled and his tongue flicked out.
Though this love does have a different taste to it. It's a little dulled by all the official masking from being one of your officers, but it does have a distinct brotherly tinge.
He shrugged and let out a small chirp, blushing slightly as he did so. Coughing into a hoof, Snowball looked towards the stage, partly avoiding Elias's eyes.
Nothing I'd be worried about for the moment, General. And if you're concerned, I'd just talk to him after the march.
Going to be doing a lot of talking after the march, Elias muttered. He then straightened and began walking towards the storehouse where his gear was stored. Either way, let's get the work, Auditor. When 20 minutes are up, I want everyone on the streets in formation, in full gear. Ready the inventory lists. And the next part of this chapter, will actually be the departing. Oh, man. I can't believe we're here, guys. We are at the march. Also, brand new art. Oh my gosh, it looks so freaking good. I love it so much. I will be putting the artist in the description, of course, for you guys to take a look at and maybe commission them because it looks so good. What else looks so good are my wonderful Patreons because they're so kind and lovely and amazing. Thank you, my tier 1s, Angel Boof, CH, Dreamless Portal, HKH4, Hyperlink, Jason, Night Game, Lord HiE, Lost Nebula, Macario, Michael McDonald, Pony Entertainment, and Redeemer of Dark. My tier 2s, Captain Blue Shadow, 212 Trooper, Andrew Ingram, Chaotic Mist, Cloud Zaza, Danish Dash, Dylan Musser, Digimax 2000, Elemental Wolf, Souls Eclipse, so user 1842, Weewoo, Mackenzie McCullers, G-Man 121 Garza, H1 Wolf King, Ken Panzer, Mr. Crazy Deacon, Nobody, Nocturne, Rocky 2522, Styx, Potato 20, Saint Gunk, Riani Dragonwolf, Sword Brother Mordred, and Volcod. A big thank you to my previous Titan tiers, Dark Guardian, Danish Dash, Maverick, and User 1842. And a big thank you to my current ones, Biseclips and Silent Titan. I appreciate your support so much, and it means a ton to me. That aside, however, this has been Fireheart. Have a wonderful day.